a new economy policy institute in 2007, tied to the Chatham House operations, tied to Canadian think tanks. And this New Economy Institute is directly takes from the name of Trotsky's New Economy policy from Russia. And the whole thing that Soros does with the New Economy Institute, which has a whole university, it's been around for like almost 20 years. And it's been processing so many talented young people in its corridors. And the whole wiring is that they're trying to promote the reconciliation of, or basically two things. He says the young people who get sponsored by his university can come up with any type of creative system that will replace the neoliberal order. The neoliberal order of globalization is designed to collapse. So what's going to come after it? We need young, fresh minds to take responsibility, even though they're not really free, and you'll see why. Because he says they have to just abide by two rules of the Institute, which is one, the rule of entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, which presumes that all systems are closed systems, meaning there's only a finite amount of resources and energy in any system that
artificial scarcity.
Yeah, that must necessarily increase scarcity and draw down the energy to go around. It's diminishing returns. So that's one principle they have to abide by as a priori. The other one is the belief in acausality and randomness in the small. So he says every individual is inherently irrational and animated entirely by lusts. Not rational self-interest, but irrational lusts animate every individual particle within the machine, each particle being a person. So chaos on the small, right? Anarchistic chaos on the small has to be assumed, and rigid conformity, closed systems on the top, on the whole. If you abide by those two assumptions, which are both wrong, by the way, then you can feel like you have a creative say in the details, but it'll all have the exact same outcome. And so you could have people having disputes about, I want my flavor of technocracy, or I want my flavor of anarcho-technocracy, or I want my flavor of thing. And it doesn't matter that they're debating and it looks all different. It's the same outcome. The oligarchy doesn't care as long as those two parameters are ultimately met. So this is the thing that the Trotskyists, as they put on the new Bertrand Russellian, like when Burnham said, I'm now a follower of Bertrand Russell's Principia Mathematica, that was the Principia in 1913, which gave rise to cybernetics. Like Norbert Wiener was a student in Cambridge in 1913, the guy who invented cybernetics during World War II. That guy was a mathematical child prodigy and became a direct disciple in Cambridge under Bertrand Russell. And Russell's Principia was based upon the idea that you could control global science. You could create. It's a 3-volume set of books that he wrote with Alfred North Whitehead, another Cambridge apostle, and basically the premise was all of the universe that has ever been known, and that could ever in the future be knowable, can be reduced to a limited array of axioms and postulates. And this limited array of axioms will, when you just get enough data, kind of like the Laplace's demon, right? That this imaginary demon that could just measure all of the velocities and masses of everything that exists in the universe. When you just get all of that data, you could plug it into this formula that is shaped by these limited axioms and postulates, these linear rules of deductive inductive logic expressed mathematically and mathematical symbolic logic. You could all of a sudden have the power of gods to forecast in a reverse function everything that has ever happened and everything that will ever happen from the Big Bang onward to the heat death. We would be like gods, omniscient, with that Principia idea. And the idea was then, well, we don't have the challenge that Bertrand Russell gave to his students, like Wiener. John von Neumann was another one, the founder of modern game theory, with Oscar Morgenstern, was that, well, we need now to take this and find practical applications for a technology of power. And so, because right now it's just theory in the Principia books, but we need to make it practice. So that was the next phase of the project. And so they were already planning out what became cybernetics. And so that was the solution that that Norbert Wiener came up with, and John von Neumann, who worked with him. John von Neumann had the information theory and systems analysis approach. But they both kind of were all sides of the same thing, which is that you can map all human systems, including the individual system of the mind, the brain, and the economy, the community, and ecological systems. Everything can be mapped like a computer. And you could just, it's very behavioristic, right? There's no soul, there's no justice, there's nothing transcendental. It's just what is measurable, very radical positivistic, like Bertrand Russell was. Everything is measurable by impulses that are shaped by a mixture of computer-like calculations, which they say is all the brain is, and hedonistic animalistic lusts for pleasure and avoidance of pain. And then, you combine that into the system, and then you presume that it's closed, and then you say, okay, all systems, whether it's going to be the new United Nations, whether it's going to be the US government, will be managed by managers who are going to be initiated to understand. If you're part of the inner elect, you will be allowed to see what the whole is doing. You'll be in an executive command center, a nervous system function to manage this highly compartmentalized bureaucratic system of the OECD or of USAID or of whatever department of education. And everything will be organized so that everybody, the 99% who just work within the departments, within the intelligence agency, within the military, they will only be allowed to know what their little local department is doing. They will not be allowed, because they're not initiated, they're not the elect, they won't be allowed to know what the other department is doing. So everybody becomes
compartmentalization of everything. Yeah. Which is what bureaucracy is, which is why I've always said bureaucracy is the antithesis of humanity, because bureaucratic systems are ultimately designed to dehumanize people and turn them into basically mindless drones.
Yep. And this is where the Frankfurt School becomes very useful. So all of a sudden, because the education system in America is not conducive to, at that time, to that type of outcome, because people are still being encouraged to read. They're studying Latin in school. They're reading classics. They're reading the dead white European males. They're developing a much more broad mental, moral identity in the school system. That's the philosophy of education back then, much more than it was after the 1960s. And so you can't get people, they keep on thinking in terms of causality, in terms of solutions, in terms of morality, in terms of God, nation, my consequence of my actions, taking self-respect. Like, all of these things make these people incompatible with becoming the sorts of cogs in a machine, unthinking cogs that will just be obedient to mechanistic formulas that are programmed into them, that they just have to abide by. They're not like that. So they go to war on the education system. And so people and also they go to war at the same time on the artistic sensibilities. So you look at James Burnham, by 1949, he's working with Bertrand Russell and with Sidney Hook, another Trotskyist, a former Trotskyist at University of Columbia.
Sidney Hook was a friend of Irving Kristol.
Yep. And they're all working on creating the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom, first to denazify Germany. But the idea that they then create, they don't stop it. They then come up with this formula. Theodore Adorno is brought in, a leading Frankfurt School thinker. The formula that they come up with is they say, okay, well, the Cold War is run by a Manichaean dichotomy of freedom versus authoritarianism. That's going to be the formula of this new Cold War. Forget about the efforts by Stalin and Roosevelt and Chiang Kai-shek that wanted to create a new economic architecture of sovereign nation states collaborating and working together on projects that bring in win-win cooperation. Forget about all that. Stalin's dead. Stalin's going to be dead soon. Roosevelt's dead. Chiang Kai-shek is well, whatever. He was always a mess. But instead, we're going to have this new system. Instead of cooperation, it's going to be based upon you're either red or you're blue, right? You're pick one. You're into individual liberty or you're into the collective good, and you have to pick a side. Now, they said the Congress for Cultural Freedom 1949 crowd, right? Burnham, Sidney Hook, they came up with this idea. Arthur Koestler, also the 13th Tribe guy, he's also a member of the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom. They say, okay, authoritarianism is defined by arts which are rigid, which are literalistic, which are propagandistic, and in many ways, it's true. If you look at a lot of the propaganda Soviet type of artwork, it's very rigid. A lot of it is. But then they said, okay, inversely, with this overly simplistic, stupid formula, that the art and aesthetics of democracy and freedom will be irrationalistic, erotic, personal, unbounded by the tyranny of reason. So that became the justification for the idea that the CIA would now start funding abstract art, modernist art, post-deconstructionist literature, post-deconstructionist nihilistic poetry, Derrida and others. And that became all of a sudden, like, money just started flowing from the 50s onward into the artistic community in the West, promoting things that everyone found disgusting. Yeah. But yet money was pouring into it. And so more artists did it because they got corrupted with the idea that I can get a grant if I do art that is maybe disgusting to my soul, but I'll do it because I want popularity, fame, money, whatever. And it just started taking on a life of its own at the same time as these guys are also supporting educational reform, which is schisming the emotions from reason. So they start promoting, like, all of these Frankfurt School reformers of education they're all bringing in a new, like, they're basically saying dead white European males are obsolete. We have to only read relevant modernist thinkers who can speak to the ugliness of our day. So that becomes what sets the tone for literary education. Our art history is seen through that lens. They say they start saying things that nobody ever believed before, that science and engineering should be untainted by the ugliness of our subject, or untainted by the pollution of our subjective emotions. And so we have to start schisming away, carving out the logical, the math, the STEM sciences, right? The STEM programs have to be carved away and purified of emotion. And the arts have to be purified of the contamination of reason, which is a tyranny. It destroys the freedom of the individual to express their emotions. So they started creating these super schism compartmentalized school systems that produce schism compartmentalized victims who would then go get jobs in the think tank world, in bureaucracy, or whatever, and they just lost the ability to think as a human should think. And here we are now, several generations in.